In today's story, old mistakes have had far-reaching consequences, like in a butterfly effect. Sometimes we are unaware that a person living beside us has been harboring a grudge for years, until they are finally ready to take bloody revenge. On January 11th, 2018, in Sacramento, California, USA, Dean Wright nervously began waiting for his younger brother. They had planned to meet that afternoon, but the older brother could not reach the younger one, named Raymond, or as everyone called him, Ray. They had always gotten along well, stayed in regular contact, and called each other daily. But suddenly, the younger one had disappeared. He seemed to have vanished without a trace. There were no calls or messages from him, and his social media activity had dwindled to zero. There were no new posts or photos. He didn't even go on his page or pick up the phone. 55-year-old Ray took care of his own affairs. He owned his own carpentry business and could indeed carry out his work in a way that made him nearly invisible. But it rarely lasted more than half a day if he was dealing with business issues. Now, Ray had been absent all day. Everyone close to him, friends and acquaintances, began to worry. His sister also called Dean, trying to find out where her brother was. Ray's daughters, Haley and Kennedy, noticed their father's absence and called Dean as well. They reported their suspicions over the phone, but had no idea where their father might have gone. The daughters said they had tried calling him all day, but the voicemail picked up every time. The older brother of the missing man dialed the number repeatedly, but had no success. That evening, Dean decided to check Ray's house in Rockland, a suburb of Sacramento. Raymond also had a store nearby where he ran his business, and things were going well. Unfortunately, Dean found no trace of his brother. Neither in the house nor in the man's workshop was there any sign of a break-in or forced entry. The house and workshop looked as if the owner had simply vanished. The brother knew exactly what the house and the workshop looked like, but upon a closer inspection of the premises, he could not detect anything suspicious that might indicate a break-in. Even the man's pickup truck was missing. At this point, Dean began to panic. His brother had disappeared suddenly without any intention of going anywhere, and his relatives had no idea where he could have gone or where to look for him. In the meantime, everyone was losing their minds, including Ray's ex-wife, Peggy, who still thought Ray was the love of her life. Peggy and Ray had married in June 1994. She had been charmed by his kindness and romantic nature. He was an excellent husband and father, even adopting Peggy's child from a previous marriage, a little girl named Haley, who was only 3 years old at the time. Ray was a wonderful man who immediately began showering her with paternal love and affection, spending all his free time with her, taking her fishing, playing soccer, and going swimming with her. Ray became a true blessing for Peggy. 3 years later, their daughter Kennedy was born. For a long time, they tried to build a happy family, but after a few years of living together, differences in their views on life started to emerge. The young mother worked and devoted all her free time to the children, while Ray frequently changed jobs. During this time, Ray founded a business, dedicating himself fully to it, and sometimes distancing himself from household responsibilities and family life due to the demands of his work. In 2001, the couple divorced and the children stayed with Peggy. Ray visited them constantly and actively participated in their upbringing. Afterward, Ray remained single for several years, not even thinking about family life due to his high workload. It wasn't until 2009 that Ray remarried, but this marriage didn't last long due to his work demands, and he divorced for the second time that same year. Family and friends said that Ray was so disappointed that he couldn't build a private life due to his work addiction that he fell into depression and began drinking. For the first time since he was 20 years old, Ray had problems with alcohol. However, once he got married, he gave up his vices. According to his first and second wives, he stopped drinking and led a sober life for many years. The second divorce, however, threw him off track, and Ray slipped into a drinking binge. As a result of his drinking, Raymond began to experience serious problems. He was never aggressive or quick-tempered, but after drinking, he became reckless. In November 2011, after another drinking spree, he got behind the wheel in a drunken state at night. Out of control, he caused an accident. The driver and passengers of the second vehicle, into which the drunken carpenter crashed, were injured and filed a lawsuit. For driving under the influence, Ray was sentenced to 18 months of probation and had to pay a hefty fine. This incident was a major shock for Ray, and he immediately stopped drinking. He joined an Alcoholics Anonymous group and attended daily meetings, determined to overcome his addiction. His family and friends supported him during this time and noticed a significant improvement in Ray's behavior and condition. This was a glimmer of hope for everyone who believed in him, and there were many. He seemed to want to make amends for everything and make up for the lost time with his loved ones and family, whom he had neglected due to his addiction. Unfortunately, Raymond never got the chance to reach his full potential. Just a few weeks before his mysterious disappearance, his eldest daughter, Haley, became a mother. This was a fortunate coincidence because Ray had now given up alcohol and was spending much more time with his family. Ray seemed to relish his new role as a grandfather. On his own initiative, he crafted a beautiful crib in his carpentry workshop and gave it to Haley as a gift. He wanted to spend the New Year's holidays with his family and was preparing to make it a memorable event. It was a shame his loved ones couldn't enjoy the holiday with the new, changed Ray. After these events, he disappeared without a trace. On January 13th, more than 48 hours had already passed, and Ray was still missing. The family still had no idea where their beloved Ray was. When Dean arrived at his brother's house for the second time on January 13th, 2018, 2 days after Ray's disappearance, he immediately noticed the smell of marijuana at the entrance. This struck him as strange because even if Raymond had returned, he had never been involved in smoking illegal substances. Suddenly, a stranger emerged from the darkness of the room and tried to chase Dean away. The older brother didn't back down and tried to find out who it was and why the stranger was in his brother's house. The unknown man took a step toward him, staring deeply into Dean's eyes, before tearing himself away and fleeing through the back door. Confused, Dean called emergency services, and the Rockland police arrived at the scene within minutes. All that was left after the stranger's escape was a glass with ice, lemonade, a lid, and a straw. These were the only clues police officers found after numerous searches of Ray's house. These pieces of evidence would later play a significant role in the investigation. Naturally, the encounter was so unexpected and suspicious that the officers immediately suspected a connection between the unknown intruder and Ray's disappearance. Friends described Raymond as a creative and kind man. After overcoming his addiction, his positive qualities became even more apparent. No one believed he would just run away and abandon his family, especially after becoming a grandfather. This event was so joyful and long awaited for him that he simply radiated happiness. He had no enemies, even during the time when he had alcohol problems. Ray was calm and avoided conflicts, never getting involved in fights. After this strange encounter, Dean's worry increased. He wondered if it could have been a coincidence. Dean was well acquainted with Ray's close circle, but it was the first time he had ever seen this man, which struck him as odd. Only 2 days had passed since Ray's disappearance when an aggressive stranger showed up in the house, so the man was immediately suspected of a likely crime. However, the police had no leads on where exactly to search for him. Raymond was placed on the missing persons list, and an active search was initiated. The police suspected that Ray might have relapsed and gone on a drinking spree again. However, he was known as one of the most resilient members of his AA group. Ray did not go there for support, but to set an example and prove that it was possible to completely give up alcohol and live a fulfilling life even after years of drinking. In fact, no traces of alcohol were found in his house. The police checked his bank card transactions, cell phone data, and vehicle records, but found no activity. It was as if he had vanished. No one he knew had seen him in the past few days. If the stranger in the house had anything to do with Ray's disappearance, he certainly hadn't taken any of Ray's belongings. The cell phone was turned off, making it impossible to receive a signal. It was as if Ray had disappeared into thin air. After the house was searched, a search operation was organized. Volunteers distributed flyers with photos and information about the missing man and his car. The police appealed to the public through the media, but to no avail. A sketch of the stranger seen in Ray's brother's house was made to gather further information based on Dean's account. Unfortunately, a database search yielded no matches. The fingerprints and DNA samples from the glass and straw were not in the police database. After a week of unsuccessful searching, the police finally found Ray's white 2016 Ford F-250. The vehicle was found abandoned on January 21st in the North Highlands neighborhood, an area known for its high crime rate. The mere fact that the vehicle was found there was alarming. Ray had no friends or business dealings in this area, so it was unlikely he went there voluntarily. The license plates had been removed from the pickup, but the vehicle was identified based on the description given by Ray's brother. Forensic experts determined that the car had been broken into and the doors opened. Based on these findings, the officers became convinced that something terrible had happened to the vehicle's owner. Someone had clearly tampered with his property, which could have been the motive for an attack. Given the time that had passed since his disappearance, there was little hope Ray would be found alive. There was no ransom demand, but despite the police's certainty, Ray's family still hoped he would return. After the vehicle was secured by the police, state authorities requested FBI assistance. Agents arrived to help with the investigation, using their techniques to search for evidence and fingerprints of the possible perpetrator. At the joint between the mats and the vehicle body, barely visible dark red droplets were found. Testing confirmed it was human blood. To obtain a DNA sample from the missing person, Ray's toothbrush was taken from his house. After comparing the collected materials, it was determined that the blood in the vehicle interior belonged to the vehicle owner. This confirmed the police's troubling suspicions. Despite some breakthroughs, no clues leading to the perpetrator were found. The investigation dragged on, and it seemed that the investigators had reached a dead end. However, a sudden event soon changed the situation dramatically. On January 27, 2018, an unknown vehicle sped through Sacramento. The police pursued it, struggling to keep up with the driver, who reached speeds of up to 100 miles per hour in certain areas. The chase, which saw dozens of traffic violations and put several people in danger, finally ended abruptly when the speeding vehicle crashed head-on into an oncoming car. Fortunately, the driver survived, though he was trapped by metal fragments inside the cab and sustained only a broken leg and minor injuries. At this point, the officers had no idea how dangerous the man who had fallen into their hands was. The California Highway Patrol handcuffed the deranged driver, who was heavily intoxicated at the time of his arrest. It turned out that the suspect was Victor Gray, who had previously had several run-ins with the law. He was wanted for a lesser offense, but now faced an additional charge of drunk driving, as he had clearly endangered people's lives. The speeding driver was taken to the hospital, where he had to be treated under guard. Immediately after that, he was taken to the Sacramento County Jail. The more the police analyzed Victor Gray's life circumstances, the more suspicions and accusations emerged. They discovered he had been driving a stolen vehicle with license plates that did not match its registration. The suspicious plates were checked in the database, and it turned out that they belonged to a 2016 Ford model, the same vehicle recently found in a crime-ridden part of the city and registered to the missing man, Raymond Wright. From this point on, Victor Gray became the primary suspect in Raymond Wright's disappearance. However, more evidence was needed to prove his involvement. Despite the police's best efforts, they were unable to expose the likely culprit. Gray fabricated various falsehoods and continued to claim he didn't know Ray or how the missing man's license plate ended up on his vehicle. The fruitless attempts to implicate Gray persisted for about 3 months until another major turning point occurred. In April, The DNA results from a straw found in Ray's home finally came back, and it was a perfect match to Victor's DNA. The circle was slowly closing. The suspect had indeed been in the missing man's home. Additionally, Ray's brother Dean recognized the man. Unfortunately, this still wasn't enough for a conviction, and it was still unclear what had happened to Ray. However, the car in which Victor had an accident contained a veritable treasure trove of evidence for the police. They searched it thoroughly on May 8, 2018, uncovering a pile of items that would eventually help solve the mystery of Ray's disappearance. Amid the seemingly worthless junk was a black tarp with a man's hat inside. Dean immediately recognized it as the one his brother always wore. There was also a yellow raincoat that Ray often used, bearing numerous traces of his DNA and blood. Even more compelling evidence included Ray's wallet, his glasses, and a shattered cell phone. The phone looked as though someone had attempted to destroy it by throwing it into a fire. Although the device was broken, possibly intentionally or accidentally during the crash, the serial number proved that it belonged to Ray. Unfortunately, no valuable information could be retrieved from it. However, the suspect's phone provided far more useful evidence. Due to the violent end of the chase, the phone had flown far into the interior of the car's cab and was found much later. On the device were photos of a lengthy, 3-page letter addressed to someone named Bob, written on January 27th, the same day as the police chase. In it, Victor detailed the grievances and wrongdoings this Bob had committed, concluding the letter with a statement that it was time for Bob to pay up and that he was waiting for his money. A detailed analysis of the suspect's cell phone also revealed correspondence with a woman named Kathy Bernard, who lived in a trailer near Ray's workshop. Victor had a brief exchange with her in which he tried to determine whether Ray was alone or with someone else at his workshop. It was evident that he knew the missing man. This exchange occurred early on the morning of January 11th, 2018. At this point, according to geolocation data, the suspect was only a few dozen meters away from Ray's workshop, apparently observing it from outside. Victor contacted the woman deliberately, aiming to confirm that his target was at work in the workshop. Kathy left her trailer, approached Ray, exchanged a few words, and learned that he was alone in the workshop. When she returned home, she informed Victor that only the workshop owner was there, enabling the suspect to proceed without unnecessary witnesses and confront Ray alone. Presumably, after receiving this information from Kathy, Victor set his plan into motion, attacking Ray just before 10 a.m. Investigators had several questions for Kathy Bernard, who might have been involved in the crime. She was summoned for questioning in October 2018, by which time Ray had been missing for nearly 300 days. Under pressure, Kathy eventually confessed that she had indeed informed Victor that Ray was alone in the workshop. However, she claimed she had thought the suspect's goal was simply to steal Ray's pickup truck. Reluctantly, Kathy cooperated with the investigation, ultimately becoming one of the main witnesses who helped solve the mystery of the carpenter's disappearance. When asked about Bob, mentioned in Victor's letter, Kathy explained that he was Robert Minora, her former partner who also had a connection to Ray. Unfortunately, it was not a friendly one. In November 2011, when Ray drove drunk and crashed into an oncoming car, Robert and his wife were in the other vehicle. As a result of the accident, Robert suffered multiple leg fractures, which left him with a permanent limp and daily pain. Moreover, he was dissatisfied with the compensation payments from the man responsible for the accident. Following a lawsuit, Ray was ordered to pay $275,000 in damages, but he couldn't cover the full amount at once. He paid in monthly installments, often late and in small sums, which only intensified Robert's frustration and resentment. When police investigated Bob's record, they discovered he wasn't someone to trifle with. He had a long criminal history and, at the time of the incident, was working primarily in the illegal drug trade, for which he had been repeatedly incarcerated. He also had prior convictions for armed robberies and muggings. Robert was visibly angry about Ray's behavior and had long been nurturing a plan for revenge. He blamed Ray for all his life's problems, and the daily pain reminded him constantly of the accident. His hatred and anger had built up over the years, eventually culminating in a calculated plan for retribution. According to Kathy, Ray disappeared shortly after she became Victor's informant. Then she learned of a local carpenter's 2-day absence and realized that it wasn't just about a stolen truck. She later admitted that she had unknowingly become a collaborator in a man's abduction, prompting her to keep quiet out of fear of becoming the next victim of these dangerous men. Later, Kathy reluctantly admitted that Victor had told her about the events at the workshop after he sent her a text message. Victor armed himself with a pistol and went to the workshop, where he struck Ray on the head, causing him to lose consciousness. He then tied Ray's hands and placed him in the pickup truck. With the immobilized truck owner lying in the back seat, Victor drove calmly through the city, eventually reaching his house several kilometers away. When Kathy asked if they had killed Ray, Victor grabbed her by the throat and warned her not to ask any questions about it. He promised to keep her informed, but didn't reveal what had happened to the abducted man. As the interrogation continued, it emerged that Tessa Trimble, Bob's new girlfriend, was also suspicious of him. This made it challenging for the police to get her to talk, as she knew he was a dangerous man and feared retribution. She admitted she had some knowledge of what had happened. Bob didn't go into detail, but said that he had finally taken care of everything that should have been done long ago. Tessa immediately suspected this meant he had murdered Ray, a thought that had made Bob increasingly uncomfortable. The main challenge for investigators was that Raymond's body had never been found, despite all efforts. In March 2021, Victor and Robert were still accused of Ray's abduction and murder, even though his remains had not been located. The criminals did not confess to their guilt, fully aware that a life sentence without parole awaited them if convicted. Their lawyers argued that without Ray's body and relying solely on circumstantial evidence, they could not be convicted of murder. Ray was still officially considered missing, though 3.5 years had passed since his disappearance. This extended period made the defense strategy less convincing, as many believed that Ray would have reappeared by then if he were still alive. However, this lack of a body allowed the perpetrators to attempt avoiding punishment. The prosecution faced several issues from the start, one of which was the credibility of witnesses. Nearly all of them had previous encounters with the law or other personal issues, which could lead to their motives being questioned. One of the witnesses was Victor's cellmate, who claimed he had heard Victor confess that Ray had been poisoned. After the murder, Ray's body was reportedly dismembered in a room prepared with plastic sheeting for this purpose. The police revisited Victor's address, but they found nothing. At one point, Victor told his wife over the phone that he needed to clean up the crime scenes, an apparent reference to covering up evidence after Ray's murder. Unexpectedly, Victor made a partial confession, revealing that he had indeed kidnapped Ray and handed him over to Robert Menora, but claimed he hadn't killed him. The reason for this revelation was an unpaid debt. According to Victor, his accomplice was supposed to pay him $10,000 in cash for the job, but Victor never received the money. On the day of the high-speed police chase, Victor was reportedly en route to confront the client who had cheated him. Had he received his payment, the chase likely wouldn't have occurred, and the suspect might have escaped without consequence. The trial began in March 2023, over 5 years after Ray's disappearance. Unfortunately, throughout this entire period, investigators were never able to locate Ray's body. Victor refused to admit to more serious crimes and, of course, didn't reveal the location of Ray's remains. The trial was challenging, as it was much harder to convince the jury of the perpetrator's guilt without a body. In turn, the defense lawyers had numerous arguments to leverage. The prosecution, however, had their own key assets, primarily Kathy Bernard, who agreed to testify against the kidnappers in exchange for immunity. Kathy played a significant role in the trial, providing a great deal of incriminating testimony against Victor and Robert. Victor's confession also became crucial in establishing Robert's direct involvement in Ray's disappearance and probable murder. Predictably, the defense focused on the lack of physical evidence, especially the absence of a body. The hearing stretched on for days, with just the review of the defendant's correspondence taking 48 hours. Afterward, the jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning with a verdict. On March 17, 2023, both criminals were found guilty of first-degree murder and abduction. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Victor refused interviews with journalists, while Robert immediately began claiming the trial had been a miscarriage of justice. To this day, he maintains his innocence, insisting that Victor and Kathy framed him. The prosecution dismissed these claims, asserting that Robert's motive was revenge. Victor had no prior connection with Ray, so there was no personal reason for him to kill him. Kathy Bernard and Victor Gray even filed a lawsuit against Robert, accusing him of stealing money from them, an amount of around $10,000. It appeared that Victor was trying to restore his sense of justice and recover the payment for the abduction he had carried out. However, this claim was not upheld in court. Raymond's body was never found, a fact that continues to trouble his family, who wish to give him a proper farewell. Despite the tragedy, Ray's daughters showed resilience. Haley, now happy with her partner and young daughter, works at a restaurant. Kennedy, a graduate of UC Berkeley, is building a career as a writer and actress. Thank you for watching, and please take care of yourselves.